2, and I call the member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Of course I support this legislation. Of course, as someone who represents a community in Victoria which has been hit by lockdowns, I support any support being given to them, any financial aid. But let's start my contribution by being absolutely clear. This bill shouldn't have been necessary. We've got a government, we've got a Prime Minister who had two jobs. Roll out the vaccine so that everyone who wants to be vaccinated can be vaccinated, starting at our most vulnerable and those who work to care for our most vulnerable and are most likely to be exposed, through the population, so that anyone who wants to be vaccinated can be vaccinated, and set up fit-for-purpose quarantine facilities across this country so we can deal with the still almost 40,000 Australians who are stranded overseas and want to come home but can't get into their own country, and so that we can open our borders so that we can have tourists upon which great sections of this wonderful country rely on for their economic input, so that we can have foreign students where education is the second largest, last time I looked, export in Victoria, so that Australians can travel around the world as we love to do and are known for and come home again, so that our economic, social and cultural future resembles our lives before 2019. Roll out the vaccine and have national fit-for-purpose quarantine. Two jobs, both of which have been botched. Both of which we hear over and over again from this Prime Minister, from the Minister for Health, from members of the government. Oh, it's not our fault. We're not responsible. We had a conversation with the states in the National Cabinet, which 1 minute is on war footing and the next minute isn't meeting for weeks and weeks on end. We had a conversation in March last year, which is more than a year ago, where the states agreed to use hotels for quarantine. So, I mean, it's not our fault. We did ask Jane Holden, that's right. We did ask her to do a review of hotel quarantine, and she did say that we should be having fit-for-purpose quarantine in October last year. But, I mean, it's not our fault we haven't done it yet, because it wasn't that long ago. Oh, no, that's right, it's June now. June, so that's what, 8 months ago? Could have had fit-for-purpose quarantine going around the whole country by now. Oh, but the Prime Minister says, and the Minister for Health says, oh, but Member for McNamara, don't you remember in our budget this year, $500 million for Howard Springs? I mean, we're amazing. We've got hotel quarantine sorted. All done. It's not what Jane Holden said needed to happen, and it is not sufficient, Howard Springs, for what is needed. And so where do we end up? With yet another leak from hotel quarantine, because no matter how hard the states work, the people who work in hotel quarantine work, the people who are quarantined in hotel quarantine work to make sure that they follow all of the standards necessary, they are hotels. They were not built to be quarantine facilities. We have had 24 leaks from hotel quarantine, and we see another one that came out of South Australia, that came into Victoria, and my community, like the rest of Victoria, faced another 2 weeks of lockdown. So it's not a political argument, it's not point scoring, it is the reality of what our communities are living through. And we're looking at what's happening in Sydney every day, day after day after day. And we're hoping that that outbreak of COVID is under control. But there is one thing that we all know and that no one with a straight face could possibly deny, and that is, had there been a vaccine rollout where the vaccine had penetrated further into the community than, are we at 3% of the community yet who have had 2 vaccinations? I think that's about what we're at. Depends which state. I take that. That's right, depends which state. But we'd be less anxious, wouldn't we, about what's happening in Sydney at the moment, because we would know that a significant proportion of the population, let alone the people who are the most vulnerable, would have been vaccinated. And they might be able to catch COVID-19, but their chances of dying from it are so much less. They might possibly spread COVID-19 if they catch it, but again, even if that is the case, and the jury is still out, the people around them who have been vaccinated, might have an 80% chance of not catching it, and if they catch it, it would be minor. This is what we're talking about, actual people's lives, and the anxiety that we feel either in lockdown or as we're watching the possibility of a creeping outbreak in Sydney which could put people into lockdown. That's why the vaccination is important now. And is it any wonder that people across Australia are actually white-hot angry when they find out through reports in the media that we could have had something like 40 million Pfizer doses?
We could have.
But apparently this government decided, we're just going to play a bit hardball, so the reports say. We're going to quibble on the cost. We're going to quibble about intellectual property.
The cheap one.
And we're just going to let the offer that it's now been reported that Pfizer gave to Australia, in January of last year, was it? Or this year? That they could deliver as many Pfizer vaccinations as we needed in this country. Is it any wonder that Australians across the country are white-hot angry? Is it any wonder that I get calls and emails to my electorate office every day of locals in Dunkley who want the Pfizer vaccination because they have an underlying health issue, because they're concerned about the mixed messages that have come out about AstraZeneca and its safety and the changing health advice that has had to come out, because they just want to get vaccinated, and then they hear that we could have had some 40 million doses. And they hear the minister saying, well, we reject that offer, apparently. It would seem his explanation is based on medical advice. And we also hear experts like Bill Botel suggesting that that seems a bit strange because the medical advice wasn't available at the time, that it said that the Australian government rejected as many Pfizer vaccinations as we wanted. It's extraordinary. And so where do we end up? We end up in a place where we don't have a proper vaccine rollout, and the government has now decided that we need Operation COVID Shield. And I mean, there is one thing they are good at, and that's naming operations. And the commander of Operation COVID Shield, who appears to be one of the most transparent people speaking on behalf of what's happening with the government, has said, well, yes, we do have some supply issues, and the explanation for why there hasn't been a rollout of a public health campaign encouraging people to get vaccinated is, well, we need to kind of get the supply issues sorted out first. So we have a government that can't do, it would seem, the 4 simple things that need to be done, and that the Leader of the Opposition has made absolutely clear that a Labor government would have done by now, and if we get elected, would do immediately. Fix a vaccine rollout, build fit-for-purpose quarantine across the country, have a public health campaign. Every other country around the world seems to do it. If I see the French video one more time come up on my Twitter feed, I think I'm going to be able to speak French. And manufacture mRNA vaccines in this country for pretty simple things that need to be done, one would think, and need to be done soon. Although I should correct myself, really, it would appear it's not that simple to fix a vaccine rollout that is in as much trouble as it is. But perhaps National Cabinet now meeting again, the Premiers will assist to get on top of it, because of course the increase in vaccination rates in Victoria that we've seen has been because the Victorian government has stepped up with a vaccination blitz. We shouldn't need an outbreak. We shouldn't need people having to go back into lockdown to kickstart a proper vaccination rollout. We also shouldn't have needed to drag this government and the Prime Minister and the Treasurer kicking and screaming to finally announce some financial support for hard-working people, particularly in Victoria recently, who couldn't go to work because of a lockdown. You know, this package today is better than nothing. But we have a package with so many qualifications on it that there are so few people really in the end who are going to benefit. You know, we have a package where a government announcement is you have to be without income for 7 days before you can even apply. 7 days without income for some people means not being able to pay the rent, not being able to put food on the table, not being able to take your kids to the local footy game or the netball game. They're the lives that many people in our communities live. 7 days without work and without pay might not seem much to people who have relatively privileged and secure lives and jobs, but for so many people in insecure work and in insecure housing, it is a very long time. And then they have to wait for their application to be processed. Is it any wonder that most of us who represent electorates where people are hard-working in low-paid jobs get calls day after day about how they're going to get this assistance and is it going to be enough for them to get through? And then we have a government that insists that, of course, it's only the people that they want to designate as being in a hot spot will get the funding. You know, it's a very strange situation where you're lucky in lockdown to be able to get the funding. You're lucky that the federal government has decided you're in a hot spot. No one wants to be in lockdown in the first place. Imagine then having to just hope that there's no political reason why this federal government doesn't want to designate you as living in a hot spot, like, for example, as was reported, taking the political opportunity to wedge the premiers so that they have to do what the Prime Minister wants them to do and not exercise their own judgment and use their own medical advice to make decisions about lockdown. Imagine using a pandemic and lockdown as a political wedge against premiers to try to force them to act to your will. Imagine being the sort of Prime Minister that would do that. Imagine announcing financial support for people in dire financial circumstances and in the announcement saying, and of course we warn you that retrospective compliance action will be taken against people if we find that it turns out they weren't eligible. Whilst in the same breath saying, but if you're a mega company where your CEO's got a bonus, your shareholders have got extra dividends and the company has recorded a profit and you received millions and millions of dollars of JobKeeper, I'll pay it back if you want to, but you can keep it also. It's up to you. Hard-working Australians with no money and 7 days of no income, we warn you, we'll come after you if it turns out that you didn't really need as much money as you got paid. Big companies, big profits. That's all right. Keep those millions and millions of dollars of taxpayers' money. You deserve it. That's the message this government is sending to people, and it's not good enough. Is it any wonder that what we hear over and over again is we need to change this government? Because we really do.
Order. The question is that the motion be disagreed to, and I call the